Hey there, Wojcik here, and in this video I'm going to be talking all about the SmallHD Focus. This thing right here. It's an on-camera monitor that comes with this tilt arm, which enables you to flip the screen all the way around really easily, and it's really my favorite camera accessory that I've tested in a while to just make it that much more fun to film and for you to be able to focus on capturing a really good image and to make sure it's in focus, exposed properly, and all the other little tidbits that are a part of this camera monitor. So in this video, I'm gonna be talking all about it and the 4 variations it comes in, the 2 HDMI versions, the 2 SDI versions, and then the 2 regular versions, and then the 2 OLED versions. So I'm gonna be breaking down all the differences between those 4 models if you're trying to choose which one to get, or if you're just looking to invest in a camera monitor, why this might be the best one for you. To get started, let's talk about the display. So like I said, there's 2 different versions. There's the regular and the OLED. The regular version is a 720p display. The OLED is a 1080p display. So you're getting more pixels jammed in there, but that regular display, the 720p version, it's still very dense because it's only 5 inches at 720p. It still looks great. It's gonna look kind of like an iPhone with a Retina screen. It's very high quality. You are going to get a brighter screen with that regular version. So if you're gonna be filming outside, I'd recommend going with that one. But if you're filming inside most of the time and you want better color representation and deeper blacks and being able to have those highlights in there, the OLED version is the one I would go with. That one has a much better contrast ratio and is just a better quality screen, which is why you're gonna pay a couple $100 more for it. In a little bit, I'll dive into the actual software and how you use the touchscreen to use the actual screen, but I want to touch on this tilt arm because I've used knockoff versions of this one that have come out after SmallHD made this one, and none of them are quite as good as this one. So this is really the star of the show to me outside of the monitor being great because it enables you to flip the screen around, and whether you're filming yourself like I'm doing right now, or you're trying to show a client a preview of the image, this will automatically rotate the image for you and flip it to be mirrored. And then when you flip it back, it'll automatically do it. So you don't have to go into the menus and flip the display. And that's something that's really frustrating for me when I'm using a monitor that doesn't do that. This tilt arm easily just mounts to the cold shoe or hot shoe on top of your camera. Super simple, slide it into the top there, or it has a way that you can mount it with an arm if you want. Personally, I don't like using these things for monitors because if they loosen, they'll just fall. This is just a much better system to put right on top of a camera. This little silver knob here, that tells you how tight it's going to be. So if it's really hard to move, you just loosen the silver knob a little bit. It'll be a little bit easier to flip. It also has a cold shoe on the side. So I've been putting a microphone on the side there. That's the logical thing. If you had a wireless mic receiver, you might put that there as well. But putting a shotgun mic on top right there, running both those cables down into my camera is what I've been doing. If you don't want to use the tilt arm at all, you can take it off, and there are 3/4 20-inch mounting points there as well, so you could use an arm if you really wanted to, but in general, I've kept these tilt arms on them the whole time I've been using them. Then you're gonna get either an HDMI version because that's the plug that all of your cameras take if you're using a mirrorless or DSLR or point and shoot, or even some entry-level cinema cameras only have HDMI ports. But if you are using a higher end camera that takes SDI, or maybe a Blackmagic camera that has SDI inputs, or a Red or Alexa or something like that, you're gonna know that you're gonna want SDI because the locking cables, these things are much better than HDMI cables because when you screw them in, they lock in place. If you have a camera with SDI, you probably already know that, but I would only use SDI on those kinds of cameras. So just make sure you're getting the right one. Most people are probably gonna be getting the HDMI versions. So they have these kind of special HDMI cables here. Because the HDMI version of the SmallHD Focus uses this micro HDMI cable, which can be pretty finicky and pretty cheap, they've kind of made their own style where it has a big, thick section here, and it only can go in one way into the monitor. It's kind of finicky at first, but once you get the hang of which direction it goes every time, it's actually really nice and it doesn't just pull out automatically. And then depending on what camera you have or the kit that you buy from SmallHD, you're going to get different HDMI cables. So you're gonna wanna know what your camera has. Does it have micro or mini or full HDMI? And you're gonna wanna either buy that cable from SmallHD separate or get a kit that comes with battery packs also. So that's another thing you can do. You can plug in through the 7.2 volt plug right here and run it all the way into the battery pack of your camera. Now, it doesn't work for cinema cameras or higher end things because that's probably not enough voltage and draw, but for a smaller camera, they have battery pack adapters for pretty much anything out there. Panasonic, Sony, Canon, Nikon. You just have to make sure you get the right one for your camera. So I was testing it with Canon LPE6 batteries with a Canon 80D and a 5D Mark III. Worked great to power the camera and power the monitor so you can see, and it runs off these Sony L-Mounts, these NPF batteries. So if you haven't used those before, they come in 3 different sizes. The 570 size, the smaller one here, then the SmallHD Focus typically ships with this 770 size, which is just big enough to give you enough time and it's not gonna die really fast, and it also enables you to swivel this thing. The problem with going bigger than that, if you go up to 970, these batteries are too big to actually swivel the monitor all the way around. It kind of gets caught. So what I've been doing is I will use 970s from time to time, but only if I know I don't need to swivel the monitor back and forth. So in this scenario, I have a SmallHD Focus above me, above my camera here, and I know I'm not gonna be swiveling that back and forth, so I have a bigger battery on it. But when I'm out and about and filming and I wanna be able to tilt it down so I can see it or flip it to somebody else so they can see what I'm filming, definitely don't go above the 770 batteries. But from my experience, these 970s, if fully charged, can last on a SmallHD Focus for about 6 or 7 hours. So to me, totally worth it to have a bunch of these as well. To round out the tour of the actual monitor, you also have an SD card slot, which enables you to load in LUTs or update firmware. And then you have a headphone jack. So if your camera doesn't have a headphone jack, you'll get audio through the HDMI cable plugged into here, and then you can get some audio out and get waveforms on your display. Some of my favorite things about this are that it boots up in about 5 seconds, which I power stuff down because I'm always like trying to save battery and just kind of manage it. So turning on my camera, turning on my monitor, have that be ready in 5 seconds, that's pretty good. And if you're using a bigger battery, you can just leave it on too because it'll last for hours. Another thing I really like about the SmallHD Focus is an addition that I bought myself, which is the pan modification. And so it's actually this little bit right here that sits between the cold shoe and the tilt arm, and it enables you to spin 360 degrees nonstop. And this is just good because sometimes you're on the side of your camera and you want to be able to see what it's doing, or you just want to spin it around and get it just to that perfect angle. So spending the little bit more to get that just made this more flexible. Otherwise, you can flip it forward, you can flip it back, but you can't really rotate it side to side. So that thing to me was really worth it to buy. It can be really annoying when you are attaching maybe your HDMI cable and a power cable and your headphones, and there's just all these cables everywhere and there's too much slack. So they do include 3 or so little cable clips, and you clip them on the back here where these grooves are, and you can run cables into them. And it just helps clean up the camera a little bit so the cables aren't all about. And you know, it helps give it some tension too, so it won't get pulled out as easily. So I would definitely add 1 or 2 of those on if you're doing power and HDMI cable and headphones and what have you. A couple other accessories I think are worth the price are, number 1, this gimbal clip. If you are going to be mounting your SmallHD onto maybe a gimbal or a 2-handed gimbal with the crossbar that you're gonna wanna put that on, you can screw this right onto there, and then there's a cold shoe area here. So this is very much worth it. Or if you wanna mount it to a tripod leg or an overhead arm or what have you, this thing is handy, as well as a sun hood. So just make sure you get the right one because the OLEDs and the regular versions of the SmallHD Focus are different sizes. So getting the right sun hood is great. It snaps right on. It's pretty strong. I mean, it's plastic, so it bends a little bit, but it's pretty sturdy in my opinion. And I would have this on anytime I was filming outside. And the last thing I really love about this is just being able to flip it over quickly and have it mirror the image and let the other person see what is happening, or I just flip it back to myself after I've set up my shot from one side of the camera, flip it back, it automatically does that. It does take a second or so to kind of do that flip and mirror, but just not having to go into the menus and actually have to do that every time you flip it around, it's just a really nice feature, and I'm glad they implemented that. Some of the things that bother me about this, but are not that big a deal, are that number one, that battery rotation issue. So if you are using a 970 size battery, it's just kind of annoying that you can't fully rotate it. So that's just something to keep in mind. Also, you know, having to have the correct custom HDMI cable to fit into that slot. It's kind of annoying if you buy the kit or the one you buy doesn't have that, or you buy it secondhand and you're gonna have to buy a very specific cable, but it is nice that it stays snug in there, and so I don't really worry too much about that. Also, sometimes the additional cost of having to have the right power adapter for every camera battery, but realistically, you're gonna need to pay for that separately anyway, because how are they supposed to know which camera you have and which battery pack would fit best? So they just kind of let you buy that separately if you're not buying it in a kit. And so those things kind of bothered me. And then I randomly get low battery warnings when using the SmallHD Focus, even if the battery is fully charged. So in the upper right-hand corner, it'll say low battery and it'll blink red, and I don't really trust it. So I usually just pinch to see the full screen menu, and that will tell me whether or not my battery is actually dying. I think it just has something to do with these kinds of batteries, and they don't always pull the same amount of voltage or amperage or what have you, whatever the technical term is. But just having that low battery warning not always be accurate is kind of annoying. And then the last thing that's kind of frustrating is they don't have a 2:1 aspect ratio. So I was using it to film with someone that publishes their videos in a 2:1 aspect ratio, and I had to set that custom. Now, I don't expect them to have every single aspect ratio and on the slider there at the bottom, but it was nice that when I hit custom and I was dragging the vertical or horizontal scale, it would tell me what the new ratio was, so I could just get it exactly to 2:1 and then film in that ratio. Next, let's go through what it's like to actually use the monitor and the menus and the settings and setting up your different screens that you can swipe between to have your presets of what you want to be able to see on the monitor. So let's jump into that right now, starting with how you use this. So you pinch just like that to zoom in and out, and then you can have different screens set up with different settings. So let's go ahead and do a new page here. And then over on the left side, you actually hit the plus, and then you can go through all the different things you can add. So under frame, they have aspect ratios to enable you to film in different aspect ratios. You can also have safe zones or crosshairs if you want to know where the center is exactly, or crosshatch, which enables you to do grids on your frame. Then under expose, you have exposure assist, which is going to give you actually false color like that. And then under there, you can choose the exact style or, you know, make up your own color map as well. Adding another one, you can do zebras for exposure if things are overly bright. And color picker if you're trying to pick an exact color to get something exactly perfectly white balanced, or maybe just matching the exposure between cameras would be another thing to do. After expose, you have the scope section. So this would be your histogram, your waveform monitor, and your vector scope. And you can choose where these things are, how, you know, opaque they are and things like that. So you can drag them around to a different spot if you want and get real creative. I'm gonna go ahead and turn all those off like so. I'm gonna click plus, and we're gonna dive into focus. And there's two for here, focus assist, which kind of sharpens things and does the color outline that you can then change, as well as peaking. Let me turn off focus assist, and peaking is mainly just sharpening what it is you see. This just tells you how intense your sharpening is going to be. I have a lot of these, so I'm just gonna turn some of these off. If you ever want to delete any, you just click it, click into the settings there, hit the trash can and confirm, and then it's gone. So we're gonna go ahead and go to the next section, which is overlay. So this is where you would add a LUT, a specific photo you wanted to overlay. Maybe you were doing stop motion or something like that, or you wanted to match the exact shot you had the next day that you had to tear down everything and set it back up. Image capture if you wanted to do an actual image, or audio meters there to have on the bottom. Those are nice as well. And then the final section there is scale. This enables you to crop and zoom in. So maybe you're shooting with a certain setting and you are going to crop and post, and you just want to be able to do that in the monitor. You can do that as well. And then over on the side again, size and position if you want to stretch something. So how I would set these up mainly is I would probably do my aspect ratio on every single one of my screens. And the screens are different because you can swipe between them. So you can see all your settings there. And if they're enabled, so let's say you have peaking and focus assist on one, and then you want zebras and maybe other exposure related things on the next screen. And then over on this one, you might just have your aspect ratio of 2:1, let's say. So you would, set up your shot in focus on one screen, swipe to the next one and show the exposure, and then swipe to the final one and have your aspect ratio that's super clean. And that would enable you to just focus on maybe framing at that point. So that's how I would set up the different screens. You can get super custom on them as well, and you can have a bunch of them. So I just think it's helpful to have different ones for different settings. And then if you go deeper into the settings, you can change things like calibrating your display, changing the gamma shift and those types of things, controlling for headphones, anamorphic de-squeezing, scaling for certain DSLR cameras that maybe don't fully go edge to edge. And there are a ton of settings. I'm not gonna go through all of them, but just know that you can basically customize this thing however you want. So you can calibrate it to your exact colors and matching your computer monitor if you want to, and always update the firmware to get all the new features. And this is just really customizable because you can basically set up all the screens how you want them for the very specific purpose of maybe getting exposure right, getting focus right, and then getting your aspect ratio and framing proper. So I just really like how quick it is to swipe through them and get them all set up, turn them on and off, flip the screen around, see yourself, show your client what you're doing, and it's a pretty high quality display too. If you're trying to choose between which one, I personally think the OLED is really worth it because most of the filming I do is inside, and I'm not outside in a bright environment where I need to be able to see the screen, where I think the regular one does a little better. It's a little bit brighter when you're outside. Even if you throw a sun hood on the OLED, it's still a little hard to see outside, but I personally would pay more to get the higher quality screen. I just think it is better for me to be able to see that my highlights are fully in there and to see what the shadows and the blacks are actually doing in the screen. So I would pay a little bit more for that. And then it just comes down to, do you want HDMI or do you want SDI? That's gonna make your decision right there about which cameras you're going to use this the most with. And you should know that just based on whatever cameras you currently have, and you're gonna put this monitor on. So there's a lot to cover in this video. I hope you learned something about these monitors if you are looking to buy one or you already have one and maybe picked up a tip or trick. But I would recommend, there's a video from White in Reverie, and they have a video all about how they calibrate their SmallHD Focus, and I'll link to that maybe here. And then I have some other monitor videos. If you're just still in the market looking for other monitors to get for your camera, I'll put some of those up on the screen right now too. So thanks so much for watching. I've been Caleb Wojcik, and I'll see you in another one. Cheers.